Welcome everyone. This is Conducting Fundamentals. We're so very lucky to have Maestro Ernesto Smith, Artistic Director of GTCYS. We are the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphonies. We are a program that offers 10 orchestras that go during the school year, and I highly recommend you check us out, gtcys.org. Check us out in the website. You can see all the phenomenal opportunities that we have for young musicians like you during the school year. We are here to talk about conducting, so I'd like to welcome Maestro Ernesto Smith.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you. It's great to see so many people. It's wonderful.
And I see you're accompanied by Ludwig van Beethoven.
Beethoven is here, yes, just as a subtle reminder to the responsibilities that we all have as musicians. Watching over us, making sure that we're not doing anything foolish.
That is great. So before we get started, I'd like to just talk a little bit about Maestro Smith. Maestro Smith grew up in Phoenix, and then he went on to Northwestern University and then the Juilliard School, and then the Curtis Institute of Music to get his education. After that, he went on to the Phoenix Symphony to start his career as a conductor, as an associate conductor. Then he has held music directorships with the Springfield Symphony in Massachusetts, and Richmond Symphony, and currently the Quad City Symphony. He's also artistic director of orchestras at the University of Minnesota, as well as artistic director of the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphonies. So he brings a wealth of experience, and he's gonna share with us kind of like what are the nuts and bolts of conducting and conducting preparation. So Maestro Smith, my first question for you is, what does a conductor actually do?
Well, this is a question that lots of people ask, and I know students here have probably lots of experience watching conductors and following conductors. I mean, in a really basic sense, an orchestra is such a big, complicated thing, and there's so many people doing so many different things that it really takes, in order for things to be efficient and for the artistic vision to be uniform, it really takes one person to kind of create that vision, and also one person to kind of facilitate everything that needs to be done in an orchestra. I mean, it depends on how old and how experienced the orchestra players are, but of course, in young orchestras, in GTCYS orchestra, in my university orchestra, in professional orchestras, everybody has a lot of skill. Everybody in the group has lots of skill, and you hope everybody has lots of musical ideas. They know the music and they've listened to it, and they have an idea about how fast, how slow, how loud, how soft, maybe how it should be played, again, with varying degrees of experience. But you just can't have 85 different opinions happening at the same time, because it would be chaos. And there's not enough time in a rehearsal process to, for everybody to sit around and talk about it like you do in a chamber group, for example. To sit around and talk about how loud should this be, how soft should this be, what did Mozart want to say here, what do we think Bartók is telling us here. Anyway, it's just impossible to have all these discussions, and so it really has come down to having kind of one person being the leader of that and kind of getting everybody on the same page artistically. And so it's a conductor leads from a technical standpoint, starts and stops things, and has different gestures to show that, and we'll talk about that. But I think the conductor's most important job is to get everybody on the same page artistically, and therefore allowing the music and the composition and the orchestra or the choir or the band or whatever it is to really express the composer's intentions as best they can.
That is really cool and really interesting to ponder. And usually when we think about a conductor, we think about a person holding a stick and waving their arms in front of the orchestra, but that is not the way it's always been. Would you like to tell us how the
Right.
conducting profession came to be and what is how it was preceded?
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting, and the role of the conductor and the history of conducting itself, it goes hand in hand with the evolution of the orchestra. So, way back when, like around Bach and Handel's time, and even before that, there were ensembles, there were musical ensembles, but they were pretty small. They were, maybe 12 to 15 players. If you guys know the Brandenburg concertos or, Handel concerto grossos, kind of concerti grossi, it's kind of small. And at that time, there wasn't somebody who stood up in front of the orchestra. As a matter of fact, they kind of played by themselves. Either the concertmaster would, while he or she was playing, would gesture just like in a string quartet, would kind of start and stop things. Or at that time, there was always a keyboard player, a harpsichord or organ or some kind of what we call continuo instrument. And so that person who was also a musician, also a player, would also just kind of start and stop things. So it was a lot more, well, there was no one guy or gal standing up there, just leading, just as far as that goes. But then music, orchestras gradually got bigger, and as we go from Bach, Mozart asked for more players, and then Beethoven, and then like as we get closer to our time, orchestras got bigger, and music got more complicated. It got more rhythmically complex. It got more harmonically complex, and so it just kind of evolved that there needed to be a person to stand up there and lead, and also kind of aesthetically, it became more about the performer. So kind of starting with Beethoven's time, what we call the beginning of the Romantic era, is when the performer was as important or even arguably more important than the composer. And so the conducting of Beethoven symphonies, like all of a sudden now there was a different way to do it, and there was like a guy like Wagner decided he had the best ideas about how to conduct Beethoven, or anyway, there are other kind of famous people in the history of conducting who decided that it was important that the performer was almost more important than the composer, which is, we can talk about that. But anyway, so the idea of interpreting and having one artistic perspective became more and more important, and so therefore conductors, it became kind of the leader, and then like the whole kind of mythic thing about the conductor and all that. So it's evolved with the size of the orchestra and with the complication of the music, the complexity of the music.
Very cool, very cool. So we see you sitting in front of a piano, and I'm sure that has something to do with how you prepare for your conducting performances and rehearsals. So what are the skills that are necessary to become a conductor? Because if you want to play the cello, well, you get the cello and you practice at home. Or if you want to be a violinist, we have violinists, we have clarinetists in our audience today. And that is logical. You sit at home and you practice. How do you do that when you want to be a conductor?
Well, I think it's a little bit different. I mean, I'm a cellist, and you talked about where I went to school, and we will talk about what I did in high school and stuff like that. But I think, first of all, it's really important, really very, very important for anybody who wants to conduct to be a very, very strong instrumentalist. I think the experience that conductors get in performing in ensembles, whether it's singing in a choir, playing in a band, playing in an orchestra, playing in a string quartet, playing in a woodwind quintet, whatever, it's very, very important that a conductor is a strong instrumentalist, I think. We kind of will categorize it as musicianship. The conductor has to be, in my opinion, the conductor should be the strongest musician in the room, have the most musical skills. And that means to me the ability to read a score. I mean, there are a lot of technical things involved with that. The ability to read a score and all the clefs and all the kind of complications that comes with that. Have a really good ear, being able to hear things, being able to hear into the orchestra to hear what's going on. Have a sense of certainly music history and music style. I mean, what I can tell you about the musicianship required by a conductor is that it takes just a lot of instrumental skill, first of all, like I said, but also extra instrumental things like, being able to play the piano, really understanding music theory, understanding chords and how they work, being able to hear that, being able to take dictation and really hear what's going on with the orchestra. My teacher at Curtis, who was a famous conductor named Max Rudolph, the kind of very last thing the conductor learns is the physical part, is the how to beat and what to do with your hands. Because my teacher would not even accept anybody, no matter how great they looked, unless they had a good ear, or unless they had a good sense of music history, unless they could play the piano, unless they could read a score and understand the clefs, unless they had experience with chamber music, unless they understood just a lot of stuff. So it takes a lot of background, I think, to be a conductor. You can stand up and fake conducting pretty easily. You can stand up, any one of all of us here today could stand up on a box and like wave our arms and the orchestra could play. But that, that's kind of the least, in a way, it's the least important part, that unless you have the background and unless you have the knowledge, then you won't have, I think, the artistic credibility or the I don't know. Yeah, I guess the credibility, the cred that you need.
Or the credentials.
The credentials, right? To be able to tell an oboe player that he or she should play it like this, or to talk to a string section about how things should go. It takes a lot of back knowledge to have the authority. Maybe it's authority, not in a overwhelming sense, but artistic authority to speak, to have an idea about what the composers wanted, and then to bring that to life. I hope this is not like too overwhelming, because it's a lot. It's a lot. But that's the reality of what conductors do.
Absolutely. And I heard someone said that the conductor has two instruments, has two instruments, a left ear and a right ear. And that's all they have. Doesn't matter what you do with your hands or what you do with your face. But regardless of that, there is that 10% of the activity of a conductor that is the physical aspect of it. Would you like to walk us through that? Like, what do you actually do? Like, what are you doing with your arms? I mean, is there a pattern to that?
Right. Well, hold on. Let me, let's see. Hopefully I'll back up a little bit. Okay, so look, like I said, first of all, we all know what this is, right? This is a baton. And I don't know what all the students' expectations are about what's going to happen today. I mean, we'll talk just kind of about the basics, because I talked about all the background necessary and kind of the musicianship necessary, but what conductors do is a language. It's a different language. There is sign language. It's a nonverbal form of communication. And I don't mean to kind of poo-poo it, because it's really important. It's really, because it's just like if you have all sorts of ideas, but you don't speak the language of your listeners, then you can't express those ideas. And so my job as a conductor is to physically, non-verbally communicate all sorts of information about how things should play. So, if people want to kind of beat through this, that'd be totally fine. If you want, or if you just want to watch or listen. I mean, in really basics, the right hand of the conductor is used for the meter, right? And so there are just some patterns that, if you've played in an orchestra that you've seen, maybe you haven't thought much about it because it's become kind of second nature. But this is kind of your really basic. Is the camera okay?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So it's really basic 4/4, right? Down one is always down, right? We
That's
call
the
it
general rule.
yes,
One goes down.
downbeat, right? Everybody knows, like the downbeat, right? And so part of why we call it the downbeat is because one for a conductor always goes down. So the 4 pattern is like this. So it's down, across, across, and up. So that's really basic. The 3 pattern is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, a triangle. It's like a triangle. Okay. The 2 pattern is kind of like a fish hook. So it's down, the downbeat is down, obviously, down, up. Am I too low or is it okay?
You're fine.
Okay. And then we kind of vary it from there. I mean, then there's a 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyway, so those, I mean, this is like learning scales if you're an instrumentalist. You know, it's, I mean, it's like just the very basics of what conductors need to know, these patterns. And so these are things just like scales, hopefully, that everybody just kind of can do without thinking, kind of second nature. And so while you would never or hardly ever would you see me in an actual concert or rehearsal, just, you know, standing there conducting like this is what you vary this pattern, and you vary it, and then you express all sorts of different things. So that's basically the right hand. What the right hand does is the tempo and tells people where to play. The left hand is kind of the expressive hand, and so there are all sorts of things you can do with your left hand. You know, if the cellos are too loud, then, you know, probably every one of you has seen this at some time. You know, it's the universal sign of like, you're too loud. So just, you know, brass players are used to seeing this quite often. You know, this means one thing, this means something else, like give me some sound. You know, you can do a crescendo, you can ask for a crescendo, the sound builds up, you can diminuendo. I mean, there's certain, I wouldn't say cliches, but there's certain patterns of the left hand that express all sorts of things. And this is where, you know, this is kind of less improvised, I think, but your left hand is what's very expressive and free, and you can really show a lot with the left hand. The left hand also does cutoffs, right? So if somebody's playing, and I do that, I mean, every person here who's watching knows what that means, right? I mean,
right.
So I mean, these are just really basics. Where the artistry comes, I think, is how you vary the beat. Like, you know, if something's staccato, like I can show just with my beat, here's the 4/4 pattern, but I can show kind of the lightness of the character. Or if I pull it really slowly, I can pull in between the beats, and it creates kind of a different feeling. And these are things that communicate the music, communicate the character of the music without saying anything. You know, if I want GTCYS Symphony to play a loud chord, I wouldn't do this. You know, because it's hard to play loud if the conductor is giving you these gestures, right? I would be, you know, I don't know what I do, but the point is, you use the beat with your right hand, you use your left hand, and really it's important you use your face. I don't mean to frighten people, but you know, you use your face a lot to express what's going on. If it's beautiful music, if it's intense, you know, it's conducting is a very, just like all music playing is a very expressive thing. And since I don't have a cello in front of me, or a clarinet, or a trombone to express, to make intense, then I have to, with my body, with my non-verbal gestures, communicate the character of the music, and therefore encourage the players to create a certain kind of sound, to create a certain kind of energy, to play things a certain way. And so every conductor kind of develops their own way of doing that.
Your
And
vocabulary, let's say.
right, right. It's like exactly. It's like, well, it's just like scales, right? You develop a vocabulary of gestures, a grammar, where if I do this, then I want this. If I do this, then I want this. And every conductor is different, and orchestras kind of learn. Like I know, each one of you has been in. Hopefully, maybe I think you're all GTCYS students, probably, or maybe not. But you play for different conductors, and so you figure out just by kind of intuiting and by interpreting what this conductor wants. When this conductor does this, then they want that. When this conductor does this, then they want that. Ooh, that conductor, like, oh, I have to not look at that because that's not really what they want. They're asking me for one thing, but showing me something else, and that happens too. So, you guys have experience with different conductors, and so you have a lot of skill, I think, and a lot of experience in interpreting my gestures. So you understand my or any conductor's nonverbal language kind of intuitively and through the amount of experience that you've gained while playing in orchestras.
So we have a very good question here from Jack, and he's asking, do you plan your gestures beforehand, or do you just know the score and then you follow what the music tells you?
Yes. So when you're starting out as a conductor, then I would say you certainly practice your routine or your gestures more than you do later on. I mean, it's actually the same as being a really skilled player. If you're a really skilled violinist and you have music in front of you, you certainly plan out shifts and you plan stuff out, but you also don't think about it too much. You don't, it comes more naturally the more experience and skill you have. So the question is a really, really good question. There are some pieces, depending on how they're composed and how complicated they are and what the orchestra needs, where absolutely you have to plan out your gestures and you have to practice. You have to practice at home without the orchestra there, because it's so important as far as just kind of the stops and starts, as far as the logistics of the piece, that you have it perfectly down. But you get to a certain level of experience where you don't plan out your gestures, where you know the music so well that it's kind of like, as I'm talking to you right now, I haven't written anything down, but I have a really strong idea about what I want to say. And so my brain is able to put the words together so that everybody understands. Actually, that was bad. That everybody understands what I'm trying to say. And so as you gain experience as a conductor, it's the same. You don't necessarily plan everything out, but the words or your ideas come out of your body in a really natural way.
And it also varies what's happening in the midst of all that. Like, are the cellos dragging? Is this section?
What I was about to say exactly is that you also react. I mean, this is one of the most important things conductors do, is react to what they hear. And so if you come all formulaic and planned, and then it doesn't go like you planned, or something happens, then you're in trouble, And so you have to react, and you have to have the vocabulary, the gestural vocabulary to say, cellos, let's go, or trumpets, you're too loud, or timpani, timpani, you're behind, or violins, don't rush, or whatever it is you're saying non-verbally, you have to react to what you hear. And so to know the score as well as you need to know the score is the first and foremost thing. To have the vocabulary of gestures to be able to communicate with the orchestra is the other important thing. And so Jack's question is it's a really smart question, and it's tricky to answer, but basically after you get a certain amount of experience, you don't think about gestures too much, normally speaking.
So let us take a step back into what you just touched upon, which is knowing the score. And I think one of the things to learn the score is the ability to learn different clefs and stuff. And I just wanted to share with our audience here a chorale by Johann Sebastian Bach. And let me see if I can do that. There you go. I think so. Maestro, why don't you explain to us what we are seeing here on the screen? We
Okay.
have four stats or staves here.
Right. So this, okay. Wow. Okay, it's complicated. Composers, especially composers like from Bach's time and earlier, used different clefs to accommodate the ranges of the instruments and to write music down. And so what we see here is, this is for singers, or this is a chorale, basically. And you see it says soprano, alto, tenor, bass. What orchestras today use all of these clefs. Like the bass part, the bass players and the cellists often use, they often use bass clef. Tenor clef is used by cellos, by trombones, by bassoons. And it really, the only reason these clefs exist is so that the notes fit in the staff, basically. Because if these super high notes would be like ledger lines, in bass clef they'd be ledger lines above, or it'd be too low in the treble clef. Anyway, so that's tenor clef. Alto clef is used by violas, the viola section, and soprano clef is not used that often. We conductors use it. Old scores have this. But the point is, we conductors have to be totally fluent in these clefs. Like, I mean, I'll sit down and
So I just want to point out here, like, if we have any violists in our audience here, you'll find this symbol, the alto clef, very familiar. But then you see the same alto looking clef on the first line, and that's a completely different clef. Or here the tenor clef. Right. These are all, so you're reading here 4 different clefs at the same time. So Maestro, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. And these are called what we call C clefs, like the note C clefs. And it's because the middle of the clef, if you look at tenor, alto, and soprano, the middle of the clef lies on the line that is C or do, this, right? So in tenor, it's the second line that's do. Alto, it's the middle line that's do. In soprano, it's the bottom line that's do, or C, okay? So the point is, we conductors have to just be totally fluent in this. And one of the things, we were talking about musicianship before, is that a conductor needs to be able to sit down and look at has to be able to sit down. You could hear that okay, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Conductor has to be able to sit down and again be fluent enough to read all of those clefs. This is a particular thing. Bach wrote all these chorales, and the Baroque composers wrote in these clefs. But we use these clefs for transposing instruments as well. In addition to just like knowing what the violas are playing, or knowing what the trombones are playing, or what the cellos are playing in tenor clef, we use these clefs also to help us in transposing. Anyway, it's a little mind-blowing in a way, and if you're not familiar with it, one thing that I did as even as a cellist, first of all, it's really, I think, very important to have piano skills. If you want to be a conductor, there's certainly conductors who don't play the piano, so it's not like cut and dry, but it's I think a tremendous advantage to be able to play the piano for this very reason, so that you can sit down with a score and play through it just like I just did. It's a big advantage as you're analyzing scores. You can sit down and kind of piece things together. And so you know, I was lucky that I started piano with my mom, amazingly, when I was like 5 years old. I quit when I was 8, very stupidly. I quit taking lessons when I was 8, but because I switched to the cello. I wish I had not quit taking lessons when I was 8, but I continued playing. I just didn't take lessons, so I continued all through elementary school, through high school, through college. I always played the piano. I don't have great technique, but I can get around on the piano, and it's very, very, very helpful. So anyway, that's kind of an aside.
So to recap, one of the things that you said at the beginning is when you audition for your conducting education, this is a type of exercise that you had to play at the piano to be admitted into the school, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, even though, look, I have my degree in cello performance from Juilliard, so obviously at that time I could play the cello, you know, pretty well. Um, but what mattered, I mean, that mattered, that helped, of course. But if I weren't able to sit down at the piano and show my professor that I knew how to play the piano, first of all, and that I could read these clefs, that I was fluent in score reading, and that these kind of musical skills, that I had mastered those musical skills, then I wouldn't have been considered at all. So yeah, I mean, the piano definitely helped.
And I think the end goal is to train your mind's ear to be able to internalize all the music that you see on the page. In other words, when you see a page in ink, that you are able to make sense musically without having your instrument, without having the orchestra. So that is why playing the piano or singing is instrumental, no pun intended, in score preparation.
Right.
So,
Right. I mean, you made a good point because as a cellist, of course, I can sit in my room and practice for 4 hours, or as a clarinetist or trombonist or timpanist or whatever, you can play, you know, you can play your instrument and improve. But my instrument is the orchestra, and you have to be able to imagine the sound of of the score. You have to be able to look at the score and have the sound come to your mind's ear. Part of that experience is, again, sitting at the piano, and because the piano has obviously the most notes, and you can play chords, and you can kind of imitate, of any of the instruments, this is the one that you can imitate the orchestra the most easily, just because there's so many notes, so many possibilities. So.
absolutely. So we kind of covered the physical aspect, the technique that is required, the background information and skills and intellectual skills. Now, let's say we have to prepare for a concert and you have to conduct a piece. How do you start studying the piece? What are the things you do before? Yeah. What are the things you do before you show up to the first rehearsal?
Well, a majority of a huge amount of what a conductor does, most of what a conductor does, is the preparation they do before rehearsal. It is not at rehearsal, but it's before the rehearsal. And so I would sit down and, like, I think we have do we have a score page here?
We do.
Okay. I would sit
Uh,
down and read through the score, like kind of with my mind's ear, just kind of page through it. This is a piece that Gitzi Symphony played last year, La Forza del Destino Overture. And so it's, I mean, there are so many things that we have to know about. And we talked a little bit about transposition. Like, we have to know what all these instruments are: flauto, piccolo, flauto, piccolo, oboe. Clarinets are in A. They're in the key of A. And so that means a written C sounds an A. So you have to understand that every time you see that part, it's not the note that you see, but you have to know what note is going to be played. We have two fagotti, which is the Italian word for bassoons. We have corni, which are horns. They're in the key of E, and they're in the key of C. The trumpets are in the key of E. And so, like, these trumpet notes, it looks like C's. They're C's, but they actually sound E. So it'd be, right? So it would sound E. Anyway, there are all sorts of kind of complicated things that a conductor has to be aware of and be so fluent in that it doesn't make it really, doesn't get in the way of their understanding of the piece. And so I would take a score and maybe sit at the piano just like I am right now, and play through it, and look at the melody, and you know, you can't, obviously there's so much going on, it's impossible for one person to really play everything that's going on, but you can certainly get an idea about what the composer is up to by sitting and playing.
So you get the information from the composer via the score that the composer has. Is part of the legacy of the composer, but there's a moment that you have to make decisions. Is this quarter note long? Is this short? In this mix of things, in this very loud chord, which instrument do I want to hear? Who's leading the texture? What kind of sound are we gonna go? So there's the decision making. How do you make those decisions?
Well, I mean, I think every musician here in our session right now makes these same decisions. If you see the composer has written forte, for example, you know, that can mean 10 different things. How loud is forte? How loud is loud? Forte means strong. It doesn't even mean loud. It just means strong. And so how loud is that? What kind of sound? You know, if the composer says espressivo, you know, that could mean, well, I need to vibrate a certain way. I need to change the speed of my vibrato, or I need to change my breath. I mean, it can mean all sorts of things. So we're all interpreters. We all have done what I'm about to talk about because we're all musicians. And what the composers tell us is just part of the story. It's the notes, the note values, the rhythms, and the dynamics, and maybe some expression ideas and things. But there's so many unanswered questions with that. And so you learn to do that, just like all of the young musicians here today are learning to do that, I think, by listening to others, by listening to the example of others, by... Could I have quiet, please? Sorry, we have a little background noise here. By listening to great masters, by listening to performances of past great musicians, by listening to your teacher, you know, certainly your teacher helps with these ideas, and your teacher's job is to, you know, help you figure out how eventually to own interpretation. But I made, now as an old guy, you know, I make my decisions based on like a lifetime of experience. I was a Juilliard, played in a quartet, and I got to study with an incredible violinist who played in the Juilliard quartet. He played Beethoven.
Oh, we lost him for a second. But in the meantime, I'm gonna share a score, a scan of a score here, for you to see. This is the Mozart Prague Symphony, and this is actually a scan of Maestro Smith's score. And you can see, and like when he comes back, he'll be able to tell you all the decision making that went behind all the markings. So you can see the printed markings here, but then there's also all these pencil additions, and Maestro Smith himself has made those decisions to either add things to the score or to clarify things in the score, and to actually change some things in the score. For instance, here we see that Mozart wrote piano, but it would be more fitting to actually play pianissimo and things like that.
I'm back.
Awesome. So I was just sharing with our audience here the first page of the Prague Symphony, Mozart's Prague Symphony, right, and kind of like the types of decisions that you have to make along the lines of what you were saying.
Right. So, okay, so guys, if we look at, so what you have to do is use your imagination here. We're looking at the score. This is my score that I have marked up. And if you can use your imaginations and take away the markings that you see that you know are in pencil, and look at just what Mozart told us. So like the first note is forte, and then on the third beat of that is piano, right? So what does that mean? Does it mean we have 2 full beats of forte and then all of a sudden a piano? Does it mean we diminuendo? I mean, for me, because I know about how the bow works and because I know about how the style, what the style is of players in Mozart's time, I know, and I'm pretty sure that they would not have sustained forte for 2 full bars and then suddenly be piano. I know that this would be a kind of a diminuendo. So that's one of those decisions. I mean, I just know that because of my experience with Mozart and because of what my teacher told me about Mozart's style and because I played in orchestras with really great Mozart conductors, you know. And so then, you know, then in the second bar, we have this gesture. Right? We have it 3 times. And so for me, I don't think, and he writes forte, Mozart writes forte, but I actually think that when you have something that you repeat, it's meant to add emphasis. And so you do something once, you do something twice, you do something the 3rd time, and it's just kind of natural that each one gets more emphatic, has more emphasis. And so, I mean, that's my interpretation of it. If you look literally at what Mozart says, it's the whole second bar with the pickup is forte. So technically, if you're a literalist, then everything's the same dynamic for that one bar. But for me, it's really clear what Mozart's musical gesture is by repeating that. And so I have people start a little bit less. As you see, I marked it down to mezzo forte. Then I added a crescendo. And so it's just a way that now these will be put into the parts. And so now everybody's on the same page interpretively that the second bar is going to crescendo a little bit and will grow in emphasis.
And a lot of these things Mozart didn't mark because he didn't have to. There were conventions and traditions during his time that it was clear. For Mozart's time, what he wrote was clear enough. But as time went through, musicians have become more literal and needed more pieces of information to make musical sense out of something.
Right. It's also tricky for us. Here we are in 2020. It's tricky because, I mean, this piece was written, as you can see, in 1786. And so the musicians of Mozart's time, really all the music they played was contemporary music, was music written probably in the past, 30 years. They didn't have and so now here we are in 2020 and we have so much music that has come after 1786. And so we have to be expert on Mozart and Beethoven and Bartók and Stravinsky and George Walker and every contemporary composer as well. And so we now in 2020 have so much more repertoire than musicians in Mozart's time did. And so we have to be fluent and we have to master all sorts of different styles. So Ernesto is right. I mean, Mozart didn't give us much information. Nowadays, composers put a lot more into the score because they have to, and to be super clear about it. And so probably a composer nowadays, well, first of all, wouldn't write music like this, probably. But if there were a gesture where the composer wants things more and more intense, they would write a crescendo, or they would write whatever. They write the words more intense, or they would make it super clear and kind of more didactic in a way. And so therefore, one of the most important things that I do when I'm preparing for a performance is to make decisions exactly like we're talking about right now. Here's what the composer says, and now how do I bring that to life? And so this is not because Mozart is inadequate or because Mozart isn't thorough. It's just because my job is to understand what the music is expressing and then try to help the musicians bring that to life, bring those ideas to life. It's a pretty highfalutin idea, but it's what everybody does when you're playing your sonatas at home, when you're playing etudes, whatever. I mean, you're deciding, you're making musical decisions all the time. How short is a short note? How long is the third bar? If we go back down to the third bar of this piece, those eighth notes, Oops. Are they short eighth? Whoops.
It went to a different third page. Yeah.
Anyway, so if you look at the third bar, I mean, we have eighth notes. Are they long? Are they short? I mean, we interpreters have to decide. And so because there's not enough time for the full orchestra to sit down and say, let's try it long. No, let's try it short. Let's try this and that. Then that's what the conductor has to decide.
Let's vote. Yeah, there's no time.
Unfortunately, not a democracy.
Well, this is very interesting. So after you make your decisions of how a piece should go, it's time to let musicians know how that goes. And one of the ways a conductor does that is by submitting parts to orchestra members. Right. And generally, all those parts come marked by the conductor or by the assistants of the conductor. So it already comes with a set of instructions that are not given in rehearsal per se.
Right. Yeah, this is something that I know that those of you who are in GTCYS Symphony are very familiar with, because I have lots of my own sets of parts that I own, and I mark it really thoroughly. And so symphony players, they understand, I think, to not only look at the printed page, but also look at the markings. So this is a great example, I think. This is the first page of, this is the symphony that we did this year in GTCYS Symphony, Brahms Symphony No. 1. And so let's look at what I marked. This is the first violin part. And so this is, look, of course, string players know the symbols for up bow and down bow, right? I mean, that's obviously generally we always bow things together. And so it's really important that a conductor, this is another thing, a conductor or a concertmaster or a principal player decides about the direction of the bows, up or down. So that's a really basic thing. If you look at the first bar, I put in parentheses timp, right? Which means timpani. And so while basically this is a kind of a sign to the violins, who should I be listening for, or who has the pulse that I need to adjust to? Because here they are playing super high on the E string, forte. Brahms tells us espressivo and legato. So there's that violin sound in your ear, and so you got to know what to be listening for. And so I just put, just kind of as a help to the players, I put timp in parentheses. We have directional things. If you look at bar, what is it, 7, 8, bar 9, there's a big chord on the downbeat, followed by pizzicato, right? I put a comma in there. These are all things that maybe a professional player would as soon as they have the first run through with a conductor, stuff that they would put in the parts maybe, just so they know after that chord, we're going to take just a moment before the pizzicato just to set up the pizzicato. But if I put all these things in prior to the rehearsal, then so much more I think can get accomplished, because all these things kind of will happen on their own. Anyway, there's some more examples of if you look down like in the third.
And this is one of the things I was talking earlier, like some edits that happen. Like obviously, or from what we can see, Brahms wrote piano here, but it's actually more fitting to play it mezzo piano, because piano might be too soft to be heard. So this is a change in that the conductor has made.
Right, and is it really a change? Or I mean, piano can mean all sorts of things, as all you players, all you experienced players out there know. A solo piano, if you're a soloist and it says piano, then you play it differently than if you're part of a section and there's, let's say, an oboe solo playing in this piano. And so the exact same symbol, piano, can mean, depending on the context, can mean entirely different things. And so part of what I do, part of the reason why I mark the parts so much like this, is so that it's clear, it clarifies things. Like what does this piano mean in this case? Like here I have fortissimo sempre, right, in bar 25. Why do I say sempre? Because the bow naturally diminuendos, the down bow left to itself naturally diminuendos. And so it's kind of a reminder that this really needs to be sustained. And so the players have to adjust how they bow. no diminuendo the down bow, very, very well sustained. And we put words like tip, 34, measure 34, so the players know where to start in the bow. All these things eventually become automatic, but these are things that a conductor thinks a lot about, and especially for a youth orchestra, as players who are learning the routine and learning the kind of ins and outs of playing in an orchestra, which is a really fantastic but idiosyncratic thing. It's really, it helps with the training of the players as well.
And this is one of the things that makes GTCYS Symphony so great. And all of us who are part of GTCYS, we're very lucky to be able to hear this very piece at Fall Festival in the past November. Like when you have a section of 20 plus violinists, all intentionally trying to maintain the fortissimo, just after the simple fact that the conductor wrote sempre, always. So like we all have the same agenda, which is to sustain that fortissimo all the way through. The results are remarkable, and that is really what makes the music come to life, and it makes you lose your breath when you're listening to that human power sustaining a fortissimo.
Right, and so I, as a conductor, prepare the parts with this information, and in the rehearsals, I insist on that, and we talk about it, and we rehearse it, and so we all practice the way the bow's going to be, and we make sure we're all unanimous about that. And then, with my gestures physically in the performance and in the rehearsals, I reinforce that. Like if I were just, kind of standing up there and beating kind of a wimpy sixth, or beating really small, that's not body language for fortissimo sempre sostenuto. So I have to reinforce all that with all these things, with the way I mark the parts, with my thought process, with the way I rehearse, and then what I do physically as well in the performance.
Absolutely. So what we have kind of discussed today is there are a lot of things involved into being a conductor, and it's really a lifetime activity if you think about it. It's definitely not one of those professions in which you get out of school and you say, now I can do it, now I can perform surgery, or now I can do this or that thing. But it is very important. Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's I think, very interesting point, as you say. As a cellist, as I said, I could sit in my room for 6 hours and practice, and we can all instrumentalists practice. And unfortunately, conductors can practice, but there is no substitute for standing in front of the orchestra, because it's a living, breathing thing. And what gesture you make creates a certain thing. And you have to learn kind of cause and effect. If I want this, then I do this. If I don't want this, then I better not do that. They're both positives and negatives. And so conductors, like young conductors, can only learn by conducting. And so you have to, it's kind of like you have your private lessons in front of 95 people, And so my students at the University of Minnesota, they have their lessons, and there's an orchestra there, and like I don't know about you guys, but like sometimes, you don't want to share what your teacher's saying. It's like, oh, you didn't practice enough, or, how come you can't get that shift, or, you need to use your air in a certain way. And so, but it's a private thing. It's a one-on-one thing. But now your conductors are learning their craft in front of everybody, and they have to be really thick-skinned about that. And that's just the nature of it. You can't say, oh, I have a conducting degree, boom, I'm ready to go.
Right.
That's just kind of the very beginning of
right. And no conductor ever conducts next to like their diploma and like, hey, I'm a doctor, I'm a master's. It doesn't really matter.
It's true. But I mean, the same could be said for instrumentalists as well. I mean, because you graduate with an instrumental degree from Juilliard or Curtis or the University of Minnesota or Northwestern or wherever, it is a lifetime of learning you have to do. And there's playing in an orchestra or playing in a chamber group or any kind of musical pursuit. Thank goodness. I mean, that's one of the great things about it, is that you're always learning, and there's always more music to learn. And even pieces that you've played 100 times, there's always more to it. There's always something that maybe you hadn't thought about, or there's a different way to do it. And that's what makes it if you have the right attitude, really exciting. It can also be very frustrating because it's like, oh, I'm never going to get this. This is impossible. But I would turn it around and say, that's what the incredible challenge and the stimulus is, to always dig deeper and always, have a better performance the next time.
But so it takes so many skills and so much background experience to be able to have the authority to stand on the podium. And I'm particularly stimulated today by the high number of female prospective conductors that we have in the audience today. And but Maestro Smith, you were also in a youth orchestra once. And you were just in a place where all these students are today.
Right.
So how did that experience reflect into who you are as a conductor today? And what kind of things can our students who are listening to this conversation right now do in a youth orchestra setting or in a school orchestra setting that will aid them to become a conductor one day?
So I would say this is true about conducting. It's also true about playing any instrument, I think, is that you can learn from every experience that you have. Like, especially as a conductor, you have to have such a kind of a broad range of knowledge that, I grew up in a boys' choir. When I was 8 years old, I started the cello, but I also I was in the Phoenix Boys Choir. And so I grew up singing in foreign languages and being able to tour. We went on tours of around the world, actually, and so anyway, it's, as we all know, any instrumental playing is an imitation of singing. And so, like, I ask cellos to sing, and I ask violins to sing, and I ask clarinets to sing, and I ask bassoonists to sing, and horns to sing. It is the basis of music making. And so if you're a good singer, it's really helpful. It helps you understand that. It helps you breathe the right way. From a conducting standpoint, it helps you when you work with choruses, just in a practical way, to work with choruses and work with singers. And so anyway, I started as a young musician singing, which helps your ear, it helps your air, it helps all sorts of things. You develop ensemble skills. But I played cello as well, and I was as you said, I was in a youth orchestra for many years. And I was just in awe, I have to say, just being surrounded by my fellow musicians, and also being part of this incredible organism that was making these sounds. I had never heard sounds like this. I had never heard harmony, and I had never heard, 100 instruments or 50 instruments or whatever coming together to create something. I'd never heard like the sound of a piccolo, or a sound of a trombone, or a sound of a, close up, or a full string section. I have goosebumps, actually. You can't see them, but I have goosebumps just thinking about it, because all of a sudden I was in the midst of first of all, with other people my age who were interested in the same thing, and then creating this stuff. I remember all sorts of repertoire. A Bach fugue that was a transcription when I was playing in a younger orchestra, that I still play at the piano today, because I remember that, the C sharp minor fugue for 5 voices. I remember it so well when I was like a 10-year-old cellist, And then as you get to older, like the Dvorak Symphony No. 8 that I heard for the first time, I would play in a side-by-side with the Phoenix Symphony. This was my, hometown orchestra, and hearing the planets. I just have all sorts of memories about that. And I think for a conductor, every musical experience is one where you can open your ears and listen to others. I think the big challenge for younger musicians especially is just kind of being caught up in the mechanics of your own instrument and your own playing, so that you're not free to listen to others. And so it's easier said than done, I think, especially for younger musicians. But the more you listen as you're playing, the better musician you're going to be. And so, sitting there in the cello section, for me, listening to the brass, listening to the winds, listening to the percussion, listening to other strings, it was very educational and very exciting for me. Playing, singing in a big choir and listening, I sang, when I was in boys choir, I sang like Mahler symphonies with the Phoenix Symphony. And so that was a whole other experience. But, using every experience, whether you're playing in the pit, whether you're in a musical, whether you're in your school choir, church choir, synagogue choir, whatever, every musical experience adds. It's a cumulative amount of knowledge and experience. And so I felt really good, especially when I was in college, playing the cello and really concentrating on the cello, because I knew I wanted to be a conductor, but I knew also that every hour I practiced the cello and every experience I had with the cello would help me form into a more mature musician and a more well-rounded musician, and would ultimately make me a better conductor.
That is fascinating, and you touched upon chamber music, which I think is crucial to become a conductor, because at the end of the day, when you're on the podium, you are just communicating non-verbally. That's all you're doing. You're just making chamber music with other conductors, except that you don't have an instrument that people can listen to and hook onto and follow. But all you have is the non-verbal aspect, the nonverbal communication that you learn through the art of playing chamber music, and you have done a great deal of that growing up, I believe.
Right. I loved playing chamber music. I mean,
and you still do.
I still play, right? Even as my advanced years, I'm still trying to play the cello with other people, with certainly with other string players, with pianists, with whatever. Chamber music is critically important for any musician's development, and so I mean, I think it's a bit overwhelming in a way if we're talking about all the things a conductor needs to know. I mean, I would think as a young musician be like, oh my gosh, this is but I would, if you're interested in conducting, I mean, don't get freaked out by how much you have to know, because when I was your age, I certainly didn't know all that. I mean, all I was a sponge. I had my ears open. I took every musical experience I could. I loved doing it. I loved interacting with people, but I was just absorbing stuff. And, I probably didn't practice enough when I was in high school because I was doing other stuff as well. But it's every musical experience. I mean, here I am as an old man at age 58, all those experiences I had even back in youth orchestra and Phoenix Boys Choir absolutely have informed the musician that I am today.
And now with things like resources like YouTube is so accessible to just listen to great orchestras. You don't have to be in Amsterdam to listen to the Concertgebouw Orchestra, or you don't have to go to Berlin to catch the Berlin Philharmonic performance. So there's so much access. Like I sometimes need to stop myself, because I am spending hours and hours on YouTube just browsing through great performances and opera. And yes.
Well, the world is different than when I was growing up, because that's right. I mean, you guys, you young people, you have so many more resources at your fingertips than we did. I mean, look, we had LPs. I don't know if you know what those are. Vinyl records. Ask your parents about that. And CDs.
They probably don't know that either anymore.
But anyway, we had those things growing up, but certainly not the magnitude of things that are available now, like you said. Yeah. And so, pretty much any piece, like if you hear about a piece, a Beethoven septet, oh, I wonder what that sounds like. Well, you have 12 different performances to choose from. Oh, I understand that Hindemith wrote a trombone sonata. I'd like to hear that. Well, boom, So it's pretty limitless, actually, and it's pretty mind-boggling, I have to say.
So if you guys have any questions that you would like me to ask Maestro Smith, feel free to drop me a line here on the chat box. Jack has a question about how to improve knowledge about chords, intervals, and any advice how to do that. I can tell you, Jack, there's countless videos on YouTube that will help you understand the concept. But Maestro Smith could perhaps tell you better than I can how to sing those intervals and how to get them in your ear.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of programs. I think there's some online things. I really started theory frankly at summer music camp. It's when I was there playing in the orchestra, and then we'd have theory classes that talked about basic harmony and functional harmony, chords 1, 4, 5. I think if you're a pianist and or you're pursuing the piano, it really helps your understanding of harmony more, because there's certain kind of, I wouldn't say cliches, but certain kind of patterns that emerge as you're playing Mozart, as you're playing Beethoven, as you're playing Czerny Etudes, whatever, that you kind of, that you'll hear and you get in your ear. And so I think playing the piano helped my theory quite a lot. There's a lot of studying, and then of course as you get more advanced away from functional harmony and chord construction and all that. But you know, if you sit at the piano and say, you know, and where you kind of, you know, chords are constructed in thirds, right? And so to be able to sit down and like move the third around and figure out where the seventh, I mean, just kind of, you know, having your fingers do the learning for you. It helps your ear. I mean, it absolutely helps your ear to sit at the piano for hours. It just kind of sharpens everything. And it's easier to do on the piano because, you know, other instruments, it's difficult to have chords, it's sustained chords, and to kind of see, it's all kind of there at the piano. So I think that helps a lot. I know, I mean, GTCYS offers there are definitely things you can do to help your theory knowledge. I mean, I think Mr. Estigarribia is offering a kind of basic theory class. And, you know.
And I also shared here in the chat box, there's this fabulous website that I highly endorse, earmaster.com, is very great for ear training exercises and kind of like theory concepts. We have another question from Alexa. How do I relate my marching band drum major conducting with indoor conducting?
Well, Alexa asked this?
Alexa did.
Because guess what? I was drum major of the marching band for my junior and senior year at my high school. I mean, there are some commonalities, but there are also things that don't really translate. I think the thing that translates is the leadership aspect of it. I mean, you know, the waving your arms, at least the way I did it, you know, is hopefully you wouldn't do that in front of an orchestra or a band. You know, you know, because of the need to be gigantic and to communicate across a football field, you know, to people who are marching around. There are different gestures, shall we say. But nevertheless, you know, to take the same, I mean, the idea of leadership, the idea of rhythmic integrity, the idea, I mean, you can take some of these marching band things indoors. I mean, I think you have to pretty consciously, you know, downshift, you know, kind of, you know, get things smaller. And one thing that is an amazing thing to me is how an ensemble can play by itself pretty well. And so you have to recognize that you have to recognize when you're the driving force of the rhythm and when to let the rhythm kind of happen. And so I think in marching band, I think, and for all sorts of just logistical reasons, you have to really, you know, kind of guide things, although the percussion, you know, you have to guide the percussion section and they guide the rest of the band. I mean, these same things are kind of true with indoor conducting as well, but I think you can use some of those ideas, but kind of tone it down a bit. It's tricky, but again, I was drum major, and I loved the experience of being drum major. And I frankly they didn't let me conduct the band much inside because I was playing percussion, I was playing timpani. Anyway, but I loved my experience as drum major.
It kind of sounds like the difference between acting in theater versus acting for a camera in cinema. Like, it's different sorts of energy because the needs are different. So we have a question from Leo. This is a very interesting one. Who are your favorite conductors, and do you model your conducting like them?
Probably. My very favorite conductor is a German conductor named Carlos Kleiber. And that's Kleiber, Carlos Kleiber, who was just a wonderfully expressive and wouldn't say loose musician, but just he's just so natural. His gestures are natural. His personality is really engaging. His knowledge of the score is like, you know, beyond.
Flawless.
It's like beyond repute. I mean, it's like amazing. But he has a very small repertoire, and therefore he concentrated on a very few pieces, but he could conduct them like a master. And I love him because he's about the character of the music. His conducting shows the character of the music, and he's extremely clear. The orchestra knows exactly when to play, but he's not pedantic at all. But what is so engaging is how expressive he is and how he can evoke the character of the music. So there are lots of videos of Carlos Kleiber. I love Leonard Bernstein for the same reason. It's just all about the music. I mean, all these guys had big egos, and of course it was about them to a certain degree. but Bernstein is just such a natural musician that the music just flows out of him, and his gestures are crazy sometimes, and he's melodramatic sometimes. But you know, Claudio Abbado is the third that I would say. Wonderful Italian conductor who was head of the Berlin Philharmonic for many, many years. And as a young conductor, I really imitated him a lot. I have to say, I was very much smitten by Abbado's conducting. I saw him a lot when I was in college, and so I kind of imitated him a lot. I stole some things from Kleiber. I think it's natural, especially as a young conductor, to kind of try to conduct like the conductors you look up to. Just like it is for violinists to play, you know, if you love Isaac Stern's performance of the Brahms Violin Concerto, then there's certain things you probably steal, or, you know, I mean, certain things you imitate. And that's a really natural and okay thing to do. Ultimately, I think you take these ideas and you take some of the gestures and you take some of the things you steal from others, quote unquote steal, and then you kind of make them into your own. And so the idea behind it, I conduct, I think sometimes like Carlos Kleiber and sometimes like Bernstein and sometimes like Abbado, but not, I think, overtly. I think it's all just kind of added up to me, to my style. And that's, so anyway, so I don't consciously say, Carlos Kleiber did this gesture, so I'm going to do that. Or Leonard Bernstein did it like this, so I'm going to do it like that. I don't do that. But certainly the ones I admire, you know, and as I said, especially as a young conductor, I probably imitated them somewhat.
So all these conductors that you mentioned, Kleiber, Abbado, Bernstein, they all left a tremendous legacy in the world, but you actually had the opportunity to see most of them. In fact, I believe you have played under Leonard Bernstein at least once.
That is correct.
Do you recall what that felt like, or what your impression was?
It was Mahler's Second Symphony, and Bernstein, it was at Juilliard, and Bernstein came in as a guest, and just for a rehearsal. And, you know, Mahler's Second Symphony is an incredibly unique beast, especially the beginning. It's just so intense and so just otherworldly, and just like it's just one of the most intense things that you could have. And I just remember that rehearsal room just being electric, and his gestures, like, it would seem like they're not clear. Like if you were to just watch him without being in the room, it seemed like, God, how did the orchestra know how to play together? But we knew exactly. We just knew, because one of the most important things about being a conductor, I think, is, and it's force of will, but it's not in a negative sense. It's not in like a controlling, coercive sense. It's maybe force of personality or charisma, or the ability to communicate and the ability to inspire others. And Bernstein had that, you know, in spades. All these guys, all the best conductors, guys and gals, all of them have this ability to inspire and to get people to come together and to coalesce and to create something. And so Bernstein, it was just a magical experience, and hugely, hugely, you know, influential on me at that time. You know, I wanted to make music like that, and I was willing to work as hard as I had to work and put in the hours and the study, and I was willing to do whatever it took to be able to be a musician like that.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Maestro, for sharing all your perspectives with us, with our young musicians, some in GTCYS, some about to be in GTCYS, and we are so incredibly grateful to you. As a reminder, everyone, I'd like to put here GTCYS.org. We are still accepting some auditions on a rolling basis for all our 10 orchestras. So please go check out gtcys.org, and it's an incredibly transformative experience what we offer, and we would love to see you thrive in our program.
Yeah, look, may I say, you know, I love GTCYS, I love conducting symphony, I love, you know, being the artistic director, because each and every conductor is a fabulous musician, a fabulous educator, and a really inspirational person. And I know, just as Mr. Estigarribia said, for me personally, being in youth orchestra was just absolutely transformative. And we at GTCYS we strive to have that transformative experience for everybody. And we have, I think, a wonderful record of doing that. And well, I'm just grateful for all of you for being in GTCYS and the hard work that you have done, and for your parents as well. It's going to be a great year, and music is going to really continue to transform everybody, and that's what's really exciting, and that's what makes being in an orchestra such a special thing, and being with people who are of like mind. It's such a special thing, and so for me, GTCYS is just a very, very unique and wonderful thing.
Thank you so much, Maestro Smith. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to see everybody, and see you soon, I hope.